Hi, everyone. We're going to give it just a minute and then we'll get started. Give time for the AI note takers to get into the room. Right, here we are, 12:01. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this month's Webinar Wednesday. I'm Sageshni, Head of Marketing here at Mint Group, and it's really great to have you all with us. Before we get started, can we all just acknowledge the emotional roller coaster that was the promise of snowfall in Joburg? We were checking weather apps, looking out the window every 10 minutes, mentally preparing to post our once in a decade snow selfies, and then rain. That's what we had in Joburg. And frankly, I really feel robbed. And today, I'm not sure about our Pretoria audience, but or around the country, but today we've got lots of wind in Joburg. But thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we begin. As always, today's session is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again or share it with your colleagues afterwards. As always, the Q&A section is open throughout the session, so please pop in your questions into the chat as we go along. Now, today's topic is one that I think almost every organization can relate to. Most businesses don't wake up one morning and decide, let's build a disconnected technology environment. It just happens. One team implements a new solution to solve a business problem. Another department adopts something different. Someone builds a brilliant Power App. Someone else has a spreadsheet they've been protecting since 2018, which nobody is brave enough to delete. Before you know it, you've got plenty of great technology, but it just isn't working altogether. It's a bit like having fiber, Wi-Fi, a backup LTE router, and a UPS, but forgetting to plug the router into the UPS. You've invested in all the right technology, but because it isn't connected properly, you're still wondering why the internet disappears every time the lights go out. And that's really what today's conversation is about. Because the organizations getting the most value from technology aren't simply buying more tools, they're connecting the tools they already have. Today, we're going to explore why bringing together your Microsoft stack creates stronger operational alignment, better user experiences, sharper decision-making, and ultimately better business outcomes. To guide us through today's discussions, we are joined by two experts. Andries van Beek brings the strategic perspective on helping organizations get more value from their Microsoft investments, while Jacques van Heerden brings the practical delivery experience of turning that strategy into reality. But before I hand over to the gentlemen, let's do a quick reality check. We're launching a quick poll asking you to describe your Microsoft technology landscape today. It should appear on the screen shortly. So be honest, this is a safe space. Nobody from IT is going to phone you afterwards and ask you why you admitted there are still a few silos. Take a moment to choose the option that best describes your organization, and then we'll see where everyone lands before Andries and Jacques get us started. So you have it on your screen, you would have voted, and I think now is the best time for me to introduce the gentleman. I'm going to hand over to you, Andries.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks once again for your time. Jacques and I will just take you through a couple of thoughts, and then we are looking forward to a fruitful discussion in the Q&A section. So to get things going, from an executive standpoint, the slide that we're looking at is this is what we want. All right, so in terms of an integrated stack and connecting the dots, we all want faster time to value. We all want lower life cycle cost, and we all want stronger control. And a few attributes of what that looks like is, in terms of faster value, is reusing of identity data, connectors, integrations, and so forth. In terms of life cycle cost, a lot of duplication happen in businesses where, with the best intentions in the world, projects are executed in silos, and the necessary controls and processes weren't necessarily followed to make sure that it's a cohesive whole. In terms of stronger control, it's around consistent data policies, monitoring, and security foundations. And I think in the age we live in today, in terms of AI and all of the developments around that, data security and architectural discipline is core to the discussion. So this is all fine and well, but where do we start to get to these goals? And these are rules that we constantly and consistently follow at Mint. Businesses are always in a state of moving from an as-is to a to-be state. All right, and changes must consider business architecture and solution architecture. It's really tempting to look at the shiny on the table and just implement the technology because it promises value on the box. But there's discipline required here. We need to always respect our business and solution architecture, and we need to always start from the as-is state. There's a few rules that we live by in our business consulting team. And for me, it's always people, process, and technology in that sequence. The next rule in our team is why, what, how, and when. And then the next one is problem/opportunity statement for the more positive guys before a solution statement. It is really tempting to tamper with that sequence when projects are under pressure. But I think I want you to really consider the implications and the consequences of, for example, putting the how before the what, or the what before the why. It might work for a while, but when there's delivery pressure, the tougher questions get asked. In terms of on our next slide, we just move on to duplicate, just why disconnected approaches stall transformation and to some degree paralyze them sometimes. We have a lot of duplicate data and reconciliation efforts that come across our desks, and this leads to poor visibility and inconsistent metrics. In terms of repeated identity and access setup, if we start to look at different authentication and access mechanisms, it becomes really costly to implement and maintain and orchestrate all of these security layers in systems. If we look at integrations, integrations are often approached as standalone aspects to projects. And what we typically find is that there is a lack of economies of scale, and data and integrations aren't always at the same level. A few examples would be, in terms of how we address all of this, is to really back to the principles of starting with the as-is to the to-be, starting with business architecture and then moving to solution architecture, is to go and do the necessary legwork in terms of understanding the business's data domain. We need to map existing processes to that business data domain. We need to understand the applications and the integrations that underpin that data domain. And we need to be clear on where data ownership sits. So that's typically on the data reconciliation side of things. We need to come to grips with what the reality is in a business. We then need to define a to-be state. And I think a really important thing here is that this is most often a evolution, not a revolution. This is a journey. If you look at the security side of things, we need to consider the employee, the customer, and the partner-facing functionality. All right, so what we often find is that there are different authentication mechanisms for these audiences. And if we look at just recent developments on the Microsoft front, Entra External ID is now a a capability that allows authentication for employees and customers and partners. If we look at integration or point-to-point integrations, a really important piece of homework to do is to look at creating a catalog of required integrations and to identify processes that can and should be integrated. The point is also not to just blindly integrate business processes and systems. There might also be really good reasons not to integrate something. We need to also identify existing integrations and really understand what that looks like from a data transfer point of view, from a security point of view, from a performance point of view, how business rules and data transfer or transformation rules are implemented. We often find that business rules and data transformation kind of rules are all over the place. So they are sometimes implemented in the consuming application. They're sometimes tightly coupled to the integration layer itself, and often in different places. So the idea is really to come to grips with what is in the current state and to define what a to-be state needs to look like and what that roadmap looks like. A big principle here is that adequate beats perfect. All right, so perfection is expensive, all right, and in some cases really not achievable. So when creating a roadmap where technology needs to plug in, we need to be realistic and we need to understand that this is a evolution in many cases. In terms of fragmented monitoring and support, that's all really around data. Just standing still on the AI grounded side of things. AI without proper data is useless. All right, so we need to really understand what the data and the underlying data structures need to look like. If we look at existing capabilities in, for example, Dataverse, data vectorization is part and parcel of the offering. So it's really important to also understand where the Microsoft tech stack is going in terms of enabling AI-enabled data sources. I'm going to hand over to Jacques now.
Yeah, Andries, I think that was actually a perfect segue into why this conversation matters. And when we look at Microsoft, it's one ecosystem, right? We look at many different delivery modes, and some of the points, or one point that I'd like to point out is early in a project phase, a company or an organization or group of people would start to compare the different products or capabilities within Microsoft, when they should actually not be doing that, because each capability has a different mode for delivery. When we look at the M365 stack here, that's more for collaboration. So you have your tools like Teams, Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint. And then we move on to the Dynamics 365, which is more for your CRM and ERP processes. And then we look at Power Platform, which is more for the automation of processes, right? And then for Azure, you can look at spinning up virtual machines, creating a solid infrastructure for the initiative that you're working with. And then we have the AI capability. So for low code initiatives, I'd suggest using Copilot Studio, and for low code to pro code, Microsoft Foundry would be the key there. And the thing is, when we start to compare these different capabilities, we are going down a rabbit hole. That's not where we want to go. And I'd often compare this to transport. If I want to walk from point A to point B within if I want to go from point A to point B within an office, I'd walk, right? But if I want to go to the other side of Joburg, I'd drive. And if I want to go to the UK, I'd fly. So you're going to use a different capability. We can carry on to the next slide. So yeah, how the platform integrates. So back to that transport analogy, technology should be viewed the exact same. Sometimes a requirement can be solved with a SharePoint list and a Power Automate in a few days. Sometimes it needs a Power App and Dataverse. And then sometimes it just requires custom Azure solution because it supports thousands of users across the platform. And then what we see here is directly tied to what Andries said earlier, people, process, technology. So the end users experience processes, right? And the processes are automated with a Power Automate and all other capabilities. You can include Azure Foundry, Copilot Studio. And the nice thing about that is the underlying architecture. Now, users do not experience the architecture, they experience the process. And if the process is visible from a user perspective, then the architecture was not done properly. So I think increasingly we are seeing Copilot Studio and Foundry sitting on top of all those capabilities that we've mentioned earlier. Yeah, and also if we look at, how can I put this? If we take a house, if we buy a house, right? We don't buy the house for the plumbing pipes, and we don't invite our friends over to come and admire the plumbing pipes. So the architecture should be the exact same. Users should not care whether a process uses Dataverse or Foundry or Copilot or Dynamics 365. They just care whether the process is quick, reliable, and frictionless. And I think at the end of this, the best compliment an architect can receive is if nobody notices the architecture once the processes start to flow. We can go to the next slide. Go.
Right, I will take us through the next segment. Okay, so back to Jacques' point, this is really a continuum. It is not a competition. So the Microsoft stack is really vast. If I circle back and just think about my career and when I started touching the Microsoft technology stack in the 90s, you know, it was Microsoft Office and Windows and so forth. The world moved along significantly. So the Microsoft stack is extremely vast and can be suitable for providing business solutions to any size business. In commodity use cases and differentiating use cases can coexist on the same platform. A key consideration here is to be really deliberate about the business case for each of these technologies or approaches, and to be really deliberate about the intended use cases for each capability group. So as Jacques mentioned, we move all the way from no code, low code, and then the fusion side of things. That's where your business audience and your technical audience starts to work together, and then all the way up to the pro code and really deep AI integrated kind of processes. A couple of examples of appropriate use cases to the technology groupings. If we just, for example, take the rapid departmental or mobile app, that is where Power Apps and Dataverse could be a really good solution. But if we take that same discussion and we suddenly add a customer-facing mobile app to the discussion, that might change completely. That might become an Azure discussion where we need to build something a bit more custom, or because Power Apps is not public-facing. So it really depends on the use case, but the list provided on screen is a good example and a good yardstick in terms of appropriate use cases for the different offering groupings. A key observation, and I'm going to stand still on Dynamics 365 because I've seen this quite a bit in my Dynamics career, is that Dynamics has out-of-the-box functionality. It's got customer sales, service, custom insights journeys, field service, finance and operations, and so forth. But Dynamics 365 specifically should also be considered as a platform. It is highly customizable and configurable. So maybe just let's clarify the two terms. So customization is code. So there's an SDK that underpins all of that. And then configuration is part of the platform. It's part of the functionality. So configuration and customization is not a swear word. We are allowed to do that within proper architectural confines, but really it should be seen as a platform. And a lot of these capabilities should be seen as platforms and not just simply point solutions. If we look at our, let's call it our development continuum, if I rewind a couple of years, citizen development has been a term that's been thrown around quite a bit. And I think a few valuable lessons was learned along that journey. So it's really important that we join all of these different audiences together from the start without overdoing it. So if we look at the intent with citizen development, it was all around time to market, aka speed. All right, but speed without control is an accident waiting to happen. And architectural and operational discipline is core to this recipe. Just a simple example or a kind of insight someone once shared with me is around low code versus pro code. At the end of the day, with a low code solution or a platform like Power Platform, under the hood, you're still running someone else's source code. All right, so with great power comes great responsibility. The idea here would be to be clear on patterns and controls. And a really important thing is to write them down and don't assume that people understand them, and regularly refresh people's memory. All right, so this is something that is extremely important around landing this ecosystem. But just broadly speaking, we are catering here from business makers, people with deep process knowledge, people that are extremely important to this process. We allow for rapid experimentation, building out of prototypes and so forth, all the way up to the platform team that really takes care of environment provisioning, making sure that the systems are stable, taken care of, that data archiving and all of these things are executed the way they should be. And then up to your Azure and then your AI engineers. All right, I'm going to hand over to Jacques for the next part.
So if we put all of these together, we are left with three main benefits. And then when we look at faster time to market as a benefit, there are essentially two components. So for our integrated system, we look at items such as common identity and access that's already in place. We have reusable dataverse models. The connectors, APIs, and events have already been configured. So there's a lot of space for scalability and reusability. Now, on the other hand, in a disconnected architecture or ecosystem, you need to you work with competing identity stacks. There's master data duplication, additional point-to-point interfaces. So essentially, when you have an integrated environment where everything already exists, you start with a head start. And in a disconnected environment, teams first need to solve the authentication, integration, monitoring, and support before they can even start delivering business value. So speed comes from reusability and scalability. And when you start any initiative, you need to keep scalability at the core of the decision making. We can go on to the next slide.
All right, so if we look at benefit to and lower total cost of ownership, and we start to look at licensing, for example, investing in multiple technologies gives us economies of scale. So a real example would be if we use Dynamics Customer Sales and Service as an example, if we have users that need both, there's a licensing benefit in terms of that as well. So other customer sales or service is fully licensed, and then the additional module is added as an add-on. It is not a full license fee for every additional module that is added. So that's one example. There are also very different licensing models in terms of Power Apps and so forth. That really back to the earlier point around a solution that could be built for any size business, that could accommodate those requirements. If we look at integration, that's really where a lot of the expense lies. And for me, a big thing here is that technology costs are visible, but complexity costs are hidden. And that's back to the plumbing example that Jacques used earlier on. So we sometimes just look at the total licensing bill of materials, but we do not consider the people, the process, and the technology processes that sit underneath developing, testing, deploying, taking care of solutions in businesses. So it's really important to consider the whole value chain. The biggest total cost of ownership savings comes from reducing integration effort. Integrations are expensive. And for me, in my mind's eye, I'm just imagining a tar road where if a road was poured in one pour without many joins, the road lasts when the rain season comes. We all drive on South African roads and we know what that looks like. And every patch job creates another weak point in the overall experience. And for me, that's a very similar thing when it comes to integration and moving parts of a system. Every additional technology stack introduces additional operational overhead. So if we start to think about things like upgrade cycles, upgrade methods, all of these things could potentially be different, and that creates operational overhead and additional skill sets that needs to be built. So we start to really look at, we need multiple vendors, and the vendor ecosystem is really important as well. In the South African context, we don't necessarily want to pay vendors in pounds. Jacques?
Great. So for the third benefit, we look at stronger security through shared control planes. Now, before I dive into that, I just want to say that I've worked at a company before where purchasing tools was not it was like an everyday luxury. Like we could purchase tools if we see a tool and we like it, it gets purchased, and it was very attractive. But just to circle back to the tool sprawl point and to finish off on benefit number 2, if you buy more tools, that does increase the risk because you open up a door or you widen your threat landscape. So, and this is where benefit 3 comes in. If you stick with one ecosystem and connect the capabilities according to their purpose. So every new platform introduces another store, right? Another integration, another network path, another set of credentials, and another potential attack surface. Now, I've seen environments where new tools required firewall exceptions and exposed ports, and even internet-facing administration services that were forgotten long after the project was delivered. The security isn't about having the most tools, it's about having the fewest unnecessary moving parts. So one of the biggest benefits of having one ecosystem is that these components seamlessly integrate. And the components that we look at in this specific ecosystem is Entra ID for identity and access management. And we have Purview for data leakage prevention. We have data policies that we can set up. And then for applications, we can use Power Platform to build applications and automations. And then for cloud, we have Azure, and detection response, we look at Microsoft Defender. And then for AI, obviously, we have Copilot Studio and Foundry, and all of these connect seamlessly together. And out of the box, it connects together, and there's a lot of security around them as well. We can move to the next slide. So.
In terms of integrated and disconnected landscapes, this is a glance of what that could look like. So if we look at solution delivery, an integrated ecosystem, it's configure, compose, extend, and reuse. In a disconnected landscape, it's all about building and integrating repeatedly. So there's a lot of repetition in many cases where we have to re-engineer the wheel the whole time. In terms of data, I think this is for me probably one of the most important ones. Shared models and governed access is extremely important in terms of data. That if that is not in place, we start to sit with copies of data, which increases our data leakage exposure, silos and reconciliation overhead. And just practically data starts to get out of sync. It's really expensive to keep different data sources in sync, and it's really expensive and risky. If you look at integrations, it's about using connectors and APIs consistently. So it's also about security, economies of scale, reusing intellectual property as far as possible. With point-to-point interfaces, things can go wrong. There's a lot of duplication. Not every integration is equal in terms of how it was designed and architected. And we need to, every integration, we need to consider things like performance testing, penetration testing, that kind of thing. From a user experience point of view, capabilities in the flow of work. So we do not want users to switch applications unnecessarily, and it's all about employee and customer value proposition as well. A few important principles is that when way of work and just overall experience over the years is that when way of work and technology orchestration discussions and effort starts to outweigh the effort to solve a business problem or realize a business opportunity. If we talk about the way of work more than we actually work, that's a problem. Right? So if we have to fight our tooling more than we are allowed to use the tooling, that is a problem. A fundamental question when looking at something like this is, what percentage of effort, mind space, words, keystrokes on a daily basis do we spend on orchestrating our tool sets as opposed to using them? Jacques?
Jacques, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm keeping on mute because I'm not sure when my dog might bark. So when we look at an illustrative agentic use case, just to close this off, there's essentially just 6 components to it. And if we take a practical example like a hiring manager messages in Teams, an agent in Teams that please onboard Sarah, she's starting on Monday. That's the engage part. The second part is the understand part. So the agent then retrieves the employee onboarding policy, checks all the HR requirements, gathers the necessary information. So there's a lot of orchestration happening behind the scenes that the user is not aware of. And then there's the action part. So after the orchestration occurred and all the relevant knowledge has been gained, then the agent needs to act with this knowledge. So the act can look like create a request equipment form, create access requests, schedule induction tasks. So all of those can then be automated. And then we look at the process. So HR, IT, facilities record the whole process. Okay, and that is updated automatically from the agent side and from their side once they add input. Then there's the deciding factor. So it's always good to have a human in the loop. So the manager approves the request on software licenses. If there's no software licenses, that's also where human in the loop comes in. So it'll probably get routed to IT, and IT will see, okay, we are out of licenses. Can I just buy a new license, or do I need to reach out to finance to approve the purchasing of additional licenses, etc.? So where the process touches on financial decisions, it's very good to keep human in the loop element there. And then there's learn. So I think we're all familiar with the continuum of data transforms into information, information transforms into knowledge, and knowledge ultimately into wisdom. So at the final stage, we look at learn, and this is where the organization tracks the onboarding completion times, the bottlenecks, and user feedback to continuously improve the process. And this is where experience are gained. Also notice that nobody logged into 6 different systems or chased 5 different departments. You know, everything was orchestrated beautifully and automated. And that is when the dots have been connected within this one big ecosystem. And that's what agentic AI should do. You know, it should turn complex business processes into simple conversations. Andries?
Okay, so let's look at where do we start, and what does this journey look like? So what do we prioritize first? Back to the discussion around of not neglecting the as is. And we need to go and look at mapping a business value stream. So we need to identify part of the business where we can start to reduce friction in the business processes. We need to be deliberate about the environment that we select, the business process we address, and what the measurable outcomes are. Number 2 is really important in terms of creating an inventory of the existing estate. It's really important to understand the existing systems, data, identities, integrations, licenses, and duplicated capabilities. What we often find is that businesses have competing capabilities, and there's no real guidance in terms of when a duplicate capability is deliberately not used, or there are significant capability gaps that are often discovered way down the road in terms of a project delivery cycle. We need to define the platform role. So back to the M365, D365, Power Platform, Azure, AI kind of discussion. The idea is really to be clear on what the purpose of each one of these platforms are, and they are all platforms. Is to define those rules. And then the idea is to really build shared foundations. Now, this is a journey. In most organizations, this could take years to pull off. So the idea here is really to define the end state and not let timeline pressure dictate architecture. Transition architectures are there for a reason, and as long as they are underpinned by a solid business case, there's a time and a place for them. It is really an evolution, not a revolution. And it's a constant journey of reprioritization and getting back to business case. Business case discipline, architectural discipline is really core here. The idea then is to deliver a thin vertical slice of value. So something that really is meaningful to the user. And then we scale with governance. If we go back to the slide we had around the combined teams and the discussion around citizen development, without governance, adequate governance, not perfect, it really can turn into a mess pretty quickly. So the idea is to also create safety and boundaries for people to safely understand which tool sets they are allowed to use, how they are allowed to use them, which connectors we enable, and for which purposes, what a data model design should look like, what we store in a solution, what we don't store in a solution. It's important that those guardrails are defined because that creates safety, and safety gives people comfort and speed. Sue, back to you.
Oh, trying to get the unmute button. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I really like that final message, connect the dots before adding more dots. Because if there's a poll that we have on our screen, if you want to just go ahead and complete that while we conclude here. Yeah, and as I was saying, I really like the final message that you guys had about connecting the dots before adding more dots. I think that's really important because if there's one thing today's session reminded us, is that when systems aren't connected, the people become the integration. We're exporting spreadsheets, copying and pasting between applications, forwarding emails with version 7/final/V2 in the subject line. And somehow Brenda from finance has become the API holding the whole business together. I'm sure we've all got a Brenda in our companies, but the good news is that that's not how it's supposed to work. When your Microsoft ecosystem is connected, technology does the heavy lifting. Your people spend less time moving information around, less time wondering which version is the right one, and more time focusing on work that actually creates value. So thank you, Andries and Jacques, for sharing your expertise with us today and for showing us that sometimes the biggest opportunity isn't adding another piece of technology, it's connecting what you already have. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope you're leaving with a few ideas about which dots in your own organization still need connecting. Can we move on to the next slide? And before you head off to your next meeting, and perhaps to thank Brenda for years of dedicated service, I'd like to give you a quick preview of what's coming up in September. Our next webinar Wednesday is called The Next Frontier of Microsoft AI. I know it sounds pretty posh. It almost sounds like a sci-fi movie, but it's actually about something that's becoming very real for organizations. Microsoft is introducing a whole new wave of AI capabilities alongside some important changes to licensing, security, and how organizations plan their Microsoft investments. We're going to be unpacking Microsoft 365 E7 Suite, explain what the latest licensing changes mean for existing customers, and explore Copilot Co-work. And if you haven't heard of Co-work, Microsoft's new agentic AI experience that's really designed to execute complex multi-step tasks across the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. I was lucky enough to get early access to Copilot Co-work, and I'll be honest, I got completely hooked. Then Microsoft switched off my preview access. It felt like someone canceled my Netflix subscription halfway through Game of Thrones. I really wasn't ready. But the other thing I quickly realized is that these new AI capabilities don't just introduce exciting features, they also introduce new concepts like token-based consumption. It can sound a little intimidating, but don't worry, we'll unpack that, all of that next month and explain what it actually means for your organization. So as you can see, Pranay has popped the registration link in the chat. Please sign up, it's going to be a good one. Thank you again for spending the hour with us. Stay warm, enjoy the rest of your week, and I think we should safely give up hope of seeing snow now because I see the sun peeking out on my side. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everyone.